Okay, let's just dive right into unraveling one of the most famous and honestly most misunderstood mysteries in the whole of biblical literature. We're going to explore what the original text really reveals about these two heavy concepts, being called and being chosen. Now, if you've ever wrestled with these terms, believe me, you are absolutely not alone. So in this explainer today, we're going to systematically break down the original context, and what we find is this fascinating narrative that completely flips all of our modern assumptions right on their head. You've probably heard this incredibly famous phrase from Matthew 22:14, right? For many are called, but few are chosen. Now, at first glance, wow, it sounds incredibly exclusive. It kind of sounds like God sends out this massive stack of invitations to everybody, but then behind closed doors, he just arbitrarily picks a few lucky people he actually likes better. It feels a bit like a cosmic lottery, doesn't it? But as we're going to see today, that interpretation couldn't be further from the truth. So, to solve this theological puzzle, we really have to ask ourselves, what do these words actually mean? I mean, in their original context. To figure that out, we have to strip away all our modern assumptions and look directly at the original language and, honestly, the captivating story that surrounds it in the text. We aren't just looking at isolated words here, we're looking at a complete, living narrative. Which brings us to section 1, the misunderstood quote. We need to start right at the linguistic foundation here, because, well, the original Greek text completely changes the paradigm of how we understand this verse. Notice how these two specific Greek words are separated. First up, we have kleitoi, which means called, invited, or summoned. And right alongside it, we have eklektoi, meaning chosen, selected, or picked out. What the original text emphasizes is that these aren't just, two arbitrary levels of Christian VIP status. Instead, they actually describe two very different responses to God's invitation. Being chosen isn't some secret club. As we'll see, it's intrinsically tied to exactly how a person reacts to being called. So let's look at section 2, the royal wedding parable. This story provides the exact framework we need to decode the whole mystery. Jesus gives us this absolute masterclass in storytelling, where a king throws a magnificent royal wedding feast for his son. The story begins with a massive shock. The initially privileged guests, they completely refuse to come. Some just ignore the invitation to go tend to their farms or businesses, because, who doesn't skip a royal wedding to go do yard work, right? While others actually mistreat and kill the king's messengers. So after this unbelievable refusal, the king throws the doors wide open, resulting in this astonishing guest list expansion. He tells his servants, go out into the highways, invite literally everyone you find. They gather both bad and good. The invitation becomes breathtakingly broad, stripping away any requirement of social respectability. So the absolutely crucial point here is that the many are called simply because God genuinely desires people to come. The narrative highlights that this broad invitation is not based on your prior moral resume. The invitation itself is an act of sheer grace. Everybody gets an invite, bad and good, simply because the king wants a full banquet hall. But then, just as it seems like we're heading for a straightforward, happy ending where everyone gets to celebrate, we hit section 3, the missing wedding garment, and things take a deeply disturbing plot twist. The king arrives to personally inspect his guests, and during this inspection, he spots a man sitting there without wedding clothes. He walks right up to him and asks this piercing question, "Friend, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment?" This creates this dramatic, tense pause in the parable. The guest is left entirely speechless. He has absolutely no excuse. Following that deafening silence, the king actually orders the man bound and removed from the feast. And it's immediately after this startling eviction that we get the famous phrase, "For many are called, but few are chosen." To understand why this eviction happened, we really have to understand the garment itself. You see, in this ancient custom, the wedding garment was a required covering that was provided freely by the king. So the tragedy wasn't that the guest was poor and couldn't afford nice clothes. No, the tragedy was that he completely refused what was freely handed to him at the door. He wanted all the immense benefits of the royal wedding, the food, the shelter, the party, but without submitting to the requirements that the king so freely provided. The garment represents God's righteousness, a complete transformation provided by the king, rather than anything we could ever manufacture on our own. In fact, there's an entire biblical clothing storyline hiding in plain sight here. Look at this timeline. Back in year 1, in Eden, humanity discovers its nakedness and attempts this totally inadequate cover-up with fig leaves, but God steps in and provides a sufficient covering. Fast forward to circa 700 BC, and Isaiah prophesies about garments of salvation. Then, around 30 AD, Jesus introduces this required wedding garment. And finally, looking to the future in Revelation, the bride of Christ is arrayed in fine linen. The consistent thread here is stark. Human covering is always inadequate, and God's provided covering is always required. Armed with that knowledge of the wedding garment, we can now decode our core question in Section 4, redefining the word chosen. The eviction of the man without the garment gives us the exact context we need. This brilliantly illustrates the central thesis of the text. The call brings you to the door, but the garment reveals whether you are prepared to remain at the wedding. Being chosen isn't God secretly deciding he only wanted a few people. Rather, the chosen are simply those who respond to the invitation and are actually prepared for the wedding. It highlights a recurring gospel theme that we see over and over. Merely being physically present or outwardly associated with Christ is absolutely not identical to belonging to Christ. So why are few chosen? Well, there are three distinct reasons playing out here. First, many just flat out refuse the invitation because worldly priorities, even good things like businesses or relationships, become substitutes for God. Second, some, like the man without the garment, accept the invitation but do it superficially. They want the party but solely on their own terms. And third, the kingdom fundamentally requires relinquishing your old clothing, your old ways, for true transformation. Divine choosing isn't winning a lottery. It means being selected for relationship and purpose. And that is exactly why so many people ultimately miss out. They just refuse the transformation. Which brings us to Section 5, the path to transformation. We're moving from the ancient parable into a beautiful, yet highly sobering, spiritual progression. The text maps out this exact step-by-step process. First, the king calls, and I respond. Second, the king provides the garment. Third, I receive it. Fourth, the king transforms me. Fifth, I become ready. And finally, step 6, the king recognizes his own. This progression shows us something vital. We don't earn God's selection through hard work or good deeds. Actually, scratch that. It's more like we allow God's gracious invitation to accomplish a total transformation within us. We just have to surrender to the process. The balance of this whole theology is captured perfectly right here. Grace opens the door, and grace also supplies the garment. It's a profound paradox, isn't it? You absolutely cannot earn the garment, but crucially, you also cannot refuse to wear it and still claim you belong at the wedding. You have to actively receive what's being offered. This makes the whole parable intimately personal. It forces us to shift from just analyzing some ancient, nameless guest in a story to looking squarely in the mirror and asking ourselves a very hard question. What am I wearing? Have I merely accepted the label of an invited guest? Or am I actually allowing myself to be clothed in the provided garment? Because the dangerous truth is, we humans love DIY projects. We love to make our own clothes. We try to put on our own knowledge, our morality, our religious activity, our reputation, heck, even our own humility. We can be sitting right inside the church building, completely surrounded by other invited guests, feeling totally secure, while secretly trying to wear our own inadequate, self-made coverings. But literally none of those things is the wedding garment. We have to drop all of that to receive Christ's righteousness. So as we wrap up this explainer, let this prayer be our defining thought. Lord, I accept your invitation. Clothe me with Christ. Remove everything I am using to cover myself. Make me ready. The invitation has already been sent to you. But it leaves us with this haunting realization. If the king were to walk into your life right now to inspect the banquet, would he recognize the garment you're wearing? Are you still desperately trying to stitch together your own? Think about that. And we'll see you next time.